talk about the pancreas. Pancreas, it's spongy. It's behind your stomach. It's posterior to your stomach. It's not terribly small, actually. It's 12 to 15 centimeters thick, and it's 2.5 centimeters thick. So it's like a pretty good size, like hot dog at the ball game size organ. Okay. Um, it's an endocrine gland and an exocrine gland. So that means it does two things. One, it makes hormones that talk to other cells of your body, and it talks to them mainly about the sugar content that's going to come in. And then the other thing it does is it's an exocrine gland. And a reminder of what an exocrine gland does is it makes something and secretes it that's going to perform its own independent function. Like in this case, partial of a digestion, right? Partially for chemical digestion. There it is. Okay, I can say things. So that's what it's going to do. Endocrine pancreatic islets are going to secrete insulin. So there's that, and glucagon, which we'll look at in a little bit. Most of what we're doing is we're secreting a lot of pancreatic juice. It's a lot. It's like a liter to a liter and a half a day, right? So almost a 2 liter of Coke a day, which is funny because I'm talking about the pancreas and it doesn't do well with too much Coke. So secretory acini release their secretion into these little ducts. They're going to converge on the main pancreatic duct, and they're going to release, which we'll look at in just a bit on the image. It's a long one. The duct runs lengthwise, so it's like I always think of it as grapes on a vine. You know, like you have like the vine that connects to the main grapevine, and then the one that's going to be for that little cluster of grapes, and then all these little grapes along the way. It's kind of what it is. It's like collecting from a whole bunch of little grapes, little cells. It's secretion. As we just saw, it's going to meet your bile duct and dump its payload into the duodenum. Accessory pancreatic duct is a little one that actually branches from the main pancreatic duct, and that kind of has its own entrance into the small intestine and the duodenum, which is the first part. So it means that like if we're not allowing bile to be secreted, right, the sphincters are closed. Remember those doorways are closed? You can still drip drop a little bit of pancreatic juice as needed. Okay, so it means we need it to be more constant. Okay, so there's that. So sumogens are chymotrypsinogen. So again, gin at the end of this means it's a precursor molecule, and what it makes is trypsin eventually. Trypsin is another enzyme that chews up protein pretty darn good. Okay. Pancreatic enzymes include amylase, again, which we've talked about. This time it's from the pancreas. It digests starch. Pancreatic lipase, which digests fats, and ribonuclease and deoxyribonuclease, which just are going to eat up RNA and DNA. So it's a real all the way around type secretive organ. So it gets a lot of work done. Here's what it looks like histologically. Acinar cells here at the end, right, of this crypt of ductwork. And as you can see that they have all these little tiny spots on them, right? Those little kind of reddish pinkish freckles everywhere. So what that is that's the precursor molecules for like, say the trypsinogen, or maybe this is for like the amylase, all of these enzymes. It's packaging them up, and then it will push and secrete them out. So eventually it'll come out through the duct. And like a duct, as you can see, always looks like a little tire, like a circle. And the inside has a lumen, like clear open space. And this is where everything's going to flow from. Right, exocrine acinar cells down here. You can see they're very thick and dense. Here's a vein right here, part of a vein. It's a little collapsy, actually. All right, let's talk about the small intestine. The parts to know. It's divided up. Okay, so this like first super small part is the duodenum. It comes right off of the stomach, and it's going to hook right into this most superior component called the jejunum. which is going to meet with the final element, ilium, right here, like iliac crest, right up here on your hip bones, remember? Ilium there. And the ilium is going to terminate right here at the ileal papilla, which is, as you can see, kind of like a little mouth-like opening, sphincter-based opening into the large intestine. As you can see down here is your appendix, right? So that's also in the neighborhood. This is the small intestine. These are the components, okay? It's coiled tube, it's long, it's not as muscular because it wants to take its time digesting and absorbing everything it possibly can. Duodenum is about 10 inches. It's not a lot, but we have our main bile secretions in here. Pancreatic secretions are going to be coming in here. Okay, begins at the pyloric valve of the stomach for the most part. It ends at a sharp bend called the duodenal jejunal flexure. That's where the meeting point is. Okay. The duodenum kind of faces back the most, so it's retroperineal. Stomach contents come in here. We talked about all the biles and pancreatic juices and all that. This is where stomach acid is neutralized so it doesn't damage the small intestine. So that's important. So it's going to be capped and the pH is going to be kind of modulated. The bile salts and acids are going to take up the fats and emulsify them so they can be digested. If you have too much fat and then you can't digest it, right? And it can often result in like diarrhea or digestive upset. Pepsin is inactivated by increased pH, which means it just burns it and it causes it to unfold, right? So it can no longer complete its enzymatic function, right? Pancreatic enzymes work like a champ, however, at this pH, and they complete their chemical digestion at this point. Okay. Oops, there it is. Okay. Jejunum is the first, like, almost half after the duodenum. So it's about 1 meter or 2 long. It has lots of circular folds. It has thick muscular walls, so it can continue the peristalsis, pushing the bolus down. Lots of blood. It makes it a little reddish, and so the reason is because we're going to absorb a lot here. This is where we become very active in pulling off as much nutrition as we possibly can from the food bolus. Okay. All right, the last part is the ileum. It's 60%, remember, iliac crest, so up at the top of the hips is where you're going to find it. It's between 1.5 to 3 meters long. It doesn't have as much muscle or as much vasculature. We have more lymphoid nodules here, for sure. We can actually see them for the most part. We're going to kind of finish up whatever we can pull off nutrient-wise, for sure. A lot of the enzymes, I imagine, are pretty neutralized at this point. They've done what they can do. And so this is where we're going to kind of connect to the colon. Okay. The circular folds are the largest folds in the intestinal wall. They're kind of big. They allow, so they occur from duodenum to the ileum, not the entire way, but like a lot of the way for the most part. And so it kind of allows the movement, stretching and pushing all together. It also allows for us to have just more surface for absorption. It causes the chyme to actually kind of move like in a spiral, right? And that's partially also how the peristalsis is driving it. So we get a lot more contact with the mucosa, so we can do more absorption for that. Okay, here's kind of what it looks like on the intestinal villi. This is one of everyone's favorite ANP2 slides, right? We always love this. Intestinal crypts. So we're going to be pushing out secretions at this point. If you look at the tops of all of these cells, these little brush borders, right? They look like a brush because of the microvilli that's working to take in as much nutrients as it can. They are interspersed with goblet cells. They look like little like blue drops of water there, which is mucus being secreted, right? So we continue to keep it mucousy and move it down. Right. There's lymphatic vessels, blood supply. Okay, yeah, and that's the capillaries. That's good. Okay. Microscopic anatomy of the small intestine is going to be primarily concerned with the intestinal crypts. Lots of little pores. They're going to open into the glands. There's a lot of these little tiny villi, these brush borders as well, which we just looked at. In the first top upper half, there's enterocytes. So those are going to have the goblet cells. The lower half is going to have the stem cells that are constantly doing that replacement, right? Because this is a very rough environment. There's a lot of motion. Most of these cells are only expected to live about a week or less, really, for the most part. And they just kind of move and migrate up the villus, right? They move and up, just migrate on up. So there's also the Paneth cells, which I forgot to mention on the earlier slide. So these are going to be secreting a handful of different enzymes or protective, like I don't want to say immune cells, but maybe cells that are going to inhibit some of the activity of bacteria, for example. So just kind of manage the microbial population. Lysozymes split them open. Phospholipase is going to break open phospholipids, bilayers, and defensins. Also, just not allowing bacteria to take over the joint, okay, managing that microbiota. Here they are all together, just some of the cutaways. So here's that first image we saw of the villi, right? And they're covered with the brushboard cells. So just remember, there's two, people kind of forget this. So there's the villi that are sticking up, right? And then on top of the cells, there's also like the little cilia type things, right? And that's what's the microvilli, and that's the brush border. Okay, so there's two like kind of it looks like that. And so this is the top of what it looks like here of the villi, and then this is the cutaway, histological cutaway, and you can see all the crypts right in here, and where the mucosa is able to secrete or replace cells. In the duodenum, the submucosa secretes lots of bicarbonate-rich mucus because, again, we're modulating pH all the time, especially that stomach acid, which can get up to 1 to 2, pretty high pH. And we don't want to hurt the small intestine or the rest of the body. So there's that. Lots of lymphocytes coming through the lamina propria because there's a whole lot of new material, right? So what did we eat? Did it have bacteria? Did it have noxious fungi? Did it, what does it have? And so the idea is they can intercept pathogens here because there's probably going to be a lot, right? It's coming in from the external environment into a hot, warm, wet one. And so it could be, potentially dangerous if it's not managed appropriately. Okay. Again, intestinal motility, we're talking about peristalsis here. So we're moving it in a wave from the two different directions of the muscular externa. Here's the food bolus kind of pushing through duodenum, jejunum, imagine that, right? So it's just kind of pushing it through, closing it, so you can kind of see it, the bolus being pushed by the contractions. So food in the stomach is going to start that segmented reflex that's going to kind of allow for that motility of the peristalsis. Right. It's a stretch reflex. So there's, when you have the pressure, it kind of moves the valve shut. All right. Let's pause.